So thank you for coming. My name is John Fanisville. I'm a pastor in the United Methodist Church, presently serving at the First United Methodist Church of San Diego, right there in Mission Valley, on the pastoral staff. But I'm here today because I've been involved for many years with a project at the U.S.-Mexico border at Friendship Park. And I'm curious to know, because this will help inform our presentation, how many of you have been to Friendship Park? Anybody? I'll tell you much more, and I'm glad to answer specific questions about the families that reunite there. 2013 Border Patrol counted, and they counted 2,200 family reunions, about 40 or 50 a weekend. And of course, all of those family reunions happen at that location because those families are in different kinds of configurations where they don't have any other remedy. Obviously, you wouldn't choose that place for your family reunion. So people are there, the vast majority, not because they're undocumented, but because they have some status in the United States that prevents them from leaving the country. They have an immigration case pending before the U.S. courts, and if they leave the country, they lose their standing in the court. They're on parole. If they leave the country, they violate their parole. They have DACA, the deferred action. They have a legal status in the U.S., but they don't have permission to leave the country. And when people like that have family members in Mexico who can't get a visa to come to the United States, Friendship Park becomes the only place that they're able to see their loved ones. So every weekend, dozens of families reunite there in that configuration, and you saw just a couple of stories there. So here is a brief history. As I suggested in the video, I've long felt that this location really is a place where you can see the history of the border played out. That monument, as I suggested in the video, was the original boundary marker between the United States and Mexico. So at the end of the U.S.-Mexico War in 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo prescribed where the border should be, right? In Texas, there was a natural boundary, the Rio Grande River. West of El Paso, there was no rhyme or reason to it, so the treaty simply had to create a border. So the treaty specified the location, and the treaty called for the creation of a binational commission and chartered that commission to begin its work and demarcate the border 1 Spanish league south of the southernmost tip of San Diego Harbor. Sounds very precise, but in fact, the southernmost tip of San Diego Harbor floats by about a half a mile, depending on the season and the tides. And so the Binational Commission literally had to wander this territory and decide where the border was going to be. This is where they demarcated the border, and the first monument was erected there in 1849. So what I'm going to walk you through is just a history of the U.S.-Mexico border from this unique perspective, which I and other people sometimes call the birthplace of the border. It's where the border was first created. That's that aerial view, and there's a famous Tijuana lighthouse here on the south side, and the Tijuana Bull Ring. So this is a very old picture. This area is now entirely developed. It's a very urban neighborhood. But on the Mexican side, you can see that the city of Tijuana simply grew in and around right up to the border. On the U.S. side, the land was protected and is now California's Borderfield State Park. So you have a kind of a disjuncture, a very urban, developed neighborhood on the Mexican side of the fence, and what amounts to a wilderness preserve, undeveloped land on the U.S. side. You can hear the evolution of the border in the language that Mexicans use, people in Tijuana use to refer to it. So the slang on the streets of Tijuana for the border has evolved with the changing shape of the border. So in Spanish, the official word for border is frontera, which connotes what word in English? Frontier. And what does frontier evoke in your mind? But in English, what does frontier sound like? An open, right? Yeah, kind of yeah, and that's how originally, of course, for Mexicans, la frontera or el norte, very common ways of referring to this part of the world were just simply this open expanse, right? So a frontier is an official way, but people on the streets of Tijuana talk about it not just as a frontera, but they'll refer to la línea, very common in Tijuana. La línea, ¿dónde está la línea? O llévame a la línea, take me to the line. The line is that period of time in which the border was simply demarcated. Come on up, there's some seats up front. The border was demarcated with these monuments. The boundary commissions placed monuments along the length of the border, and so for decades, almost a century, until the mid-20th century, the border was simply demarcated by monuments with nothing in between. It was a line that had been drawn on maps and then imposed on the line. And so Mexicans refer to it as la línea. But they'll also refer to it as el cerco, the fence, as different kinds of fences began to be erected. For decades it was just barbed wire fence. At times there's been chain link fence. And then in the last couple of decades, walls, muro, el muro. So now people commonly refer to the border as el muro. There's the border wall, or el doble muro, the double wall. So you can see in the evolution of the vernacular. This is a drawing from the 1850s, 1852, of that monument that was erected in 1849. And you can see how there was no obstruction of any kind, nor any pretense of any obstruction. The folks who have originally created the border had no notion, they were simply not a part of the thought process that there would somehow be impediments to crossing. That was not part of the original conception of the people who made the treaty. As late as the 1890s, the monument was still completely unobstructed, but can you see what happened to it across its first 40 or 50 years? You see how it's been chipped away? For the first 50 years of its existence, the monument was a destination site for tourists, and they would chip away at the monument to take home souvenirs. And so in the 1890s, they replaced the monument with the one that is there today, because the first one had been so degraded and chipped away. So in the 1890s, they built a new one, and in order to protect the new monument, they built a fence around it. So the first fence ever on the U.S.-Mexico border was erected to protect the monument that demarcated the international boundary. And that fence that was put there in the 1890s, when the new monument was put in place, remained in place all the way through the 1910s and 1920s, when they changed the fence around it, when the automobile came in. And again, in San Diego and Tijuana, it was a popular destination. You go out to see the border, to see the beach, you drive out for the day, you maybe go over to Tijuana for a taco and come back into the United States. Simply no pretense. This is as late as 19-teens. So we have to remember that just 100 years ago, it really literally was not a part of American thought process, nor a part of American political dialogue, that the border should be fenced or walled, or simply literally, if you said that to somebody, would not have understood the concept that you were talking about. It was not until the mid-20th century that the idea of what we now commonly call securing the border, meaning making it impossible to cross. That's really only in the last couple of generations that that thought process has been a part of our public discourse. As late as the 1960s, the monument was still just had a fence around it. You can see now it's a chain link fence with some barbed wire angled out, right? That's again the perimeter of the monument. So as late as the 1960s, there were at times cement posts with a single rope hung between the posts. And old timers still commonly remember, oh yeah, I used to ride my bike out around here. I'd ride around Tijuana and come back for the day. So that's in my childhood, many of our lifetimes. This place, Friendship Park, again, was a common destination for people from both countries to meet up, to cross back and forth, to visit with friends. This is 1976, after Pat Nixon visited. You saw the images of Pat Nixon, but here again you see just 3 strands of barbed wire. The cement plaza, which was created in a single pour, half of the plaza in Mexico, half of the plaza in the United States. By its design, it was intended as a binational meeting space. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo is actually entitled the Treaty of Peace and Friendship between the peoples of Mexico and the United States. And this was clearly, as you can tell by its original design, was created as a space where that treaty and that notion of peace and friendship would be memorialized. The pictures of Pat Nixon dedicating the park in 1971, by this park I'm referring to California's Borderfield State Park. So on the US side of the wall, the surrounding area is California's Borderfield State Park, right? 1971 is when that state park was created. Richard Nixon actually, as the governor of California, had been a huge champion of public parks. He was one of the most prolific creators of public lands in the history of California. And Pat, his wife, was a huge champion of public lands as well. So when he was elected president, and this became California's Borderfield State Park, she, as the sitting First Lady of the United States, came back for the inauguration. She planted a tree. You can see the barbed wire in the back. And then after planting the tree, she approached the people of Mexico, greeted them through the barbed wire, and then grew frustrated and asked her security detail to cut the barbed wire, which they did, and she entered Mexico to greet. So this again is less than 50 years ago, the sitting First Lady of the United States would come to this location and would ask her security detail to cut the barbed wire, and the Union Tribune reported that she said, "I hope there won't be a fence here much longer." So as late as 1971, the vision of the space as a binational meeting place was still very clearly entrenched in the highest offices of the land. I have a clip, I won't play it for you, but you can Google it if you like, or if we have time, we can punch it up at the end. To get a sense of how much the language has changed, you really have to listen sometime to the Republican primary debate between George H.W. Bush and Ronald Reagan, in which they basically tried to out-open border each other. The contest in the Republican primary of 1980 was who could be a bigger champion of open borders. So Google that if you'd like to see, again, how far our political discourse has changed. They're very clear about it, it's very explicit. The question is who could be a greater champion of an open border, Ronald Reagan or George H.W. Bush, and they went back and forth trying to one-up each other about their commitment to an open border. So the fence was hardened in the 1990s. It had the feel of a chain link fence, but was a much more durable material. You can see how easy it was to see through, though, and it was very easy to convene people. This is in 2008, a binational yoga class. There were concerts and family reunions. As the video suggested, the family reunions were much more fluid. People would exchange food and gifts and spend the day together. Vendors in Tijuana would sell food and bracelets and the chicle and all the little things that people sell through the fence. So it was and it was that vulnerability that San Diego Border Patrol insisted allowed for trafficking of drugs, and became the rationale for San Diego Border Patrol to eliminate any kind of cross-border commerce or any cross-border contact at this location. Technically, it's a violation of U.S. Customs law to pass something from Mexico into the United States or vice versa without it being inspected by a customs officer. So when I started serving communion there, I first served communion in 2008, we were passing the elements through the fence, and we were told that was contraband. It was a violation of U.S. Customs law. And I kind of like that image, that the host was contraband. 2009, but as a consequence, between 2009 and 2011, they started creating a variety of barriers to prevent people from passing things through the fence. So they first erected a kind of a grill that you can see keeps people 6 to 8 feet apart. And they confronted us with a very difficult decision. By us, I'm referring to Friends of Friendship Park, and Jim can tell you more about our work as a local coalition. They said, well, we can either leave this grill up, which keeps people 6 to 8 feet apart, right? Prevents people from passing things through the fence. Or we can put a thick metal mesh on the fence. There's another vision of the grill. Or we'll put a thick metal mesh on the fence that will allow people to get up close and personal and touch fingertips and be very intimate in conversation, but they won't be able to pass anything through. Which choice would you think we should have made? Neither, yeah, that would have been my answer too. We ended up choosing the thick metal mesh because we knew from talking to families, many of these family reunions are tremendously sensitive, and more than anything, they wanted to be close and intimate. And we've since negotiated a separate space where there's something of that prior configuration. So most families that come on most weekends are now able to get a little bit of both. There's one location where they can stand at about 6 to 8 feet and they can see each other clearly. This is especially important because a lot of families are bringing children to introduce to loved ones. Very common to have grandchildren introduced to their grandparents, or aunts and uncles meeting their nieces and nephews for the first time. People want to see each other. And then they're able to go to the other space where they can get up close and personal and touch fingertips and share an intimate conversation. So by 2012, the plaza was obstructed by this thick metal mesh, the new wall going out into the ocean, and the thick metal mesh. And you can see that the monument, the historic monument, the marker of the border, was now entirely on the south side of the fence. When they put up the new wall, they wrapped it around the northern edge of the monument so that most people who come to the park in the United States are unaware that the monument is even there. I'm actually going to a conference this week in Chicago, the National Preservation Trust. One of our ideas is if we could get, it would have to be a different president, of course, but if we could get a president of the United States to declare that monument a national landmark, they would have to do something different with the wall, because you can't have a national landmark that people in the United States can't even get to. But that's another dream. So the wall, this is a second wall you can see that was erected about 90 feet north. They open this little gate on Saturdays and Sundays from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. That lets people go in on the United States side, meet up with their family and friends adjacent to the border. On occasion, they'll open this larger rolling gate for large public events. They do that 2 or 3 times a year, where it creates a little bit more of an open space. But again, this is all in U.S. territory, and you can see the border wall there in the back. But there are musical events, Fandango Fronterizo every spring, a Posada celebration. I know that your diocese has taken a mass there in the springtime.
Next year it's February 17th, first Saturday in Lent, and it's jointly with Los Angeles.
Wonderful. February 17th, I really encourage you. It's a wonderful expedition. It's a hike, but it's a beautiful hike. You're walking through undeveloped coastline, which we don't have anywhere else in San Diego, and then you get to visit this unique location. This is the place where people can see each other through the fence more clearly, and you can see these volunteers in what we call it a binational garden. They snuck in up against the fence, which they weren't supposed to do. They would have been chased out very shortly after that picture. There's, no, that's our Roman Catholic bishop. At the Posada, yes, at the last year's Posada Sin Fronteras. So this year's Posada is Saturday, December 16th, I think it is, the 2 to 4 p.m. And again, if you'd like to know more about that, you can find information on our website, friendshippark.org. So 2-3 times a year, there are major celebrations in which the place fills up with people on both sides, and you get a little bit of a feel of what it was like before the heavy security measures. A more typical Sunday would be this. I'm on the United States side with a small group of people, and on the Mexican side is a much larger group of people. We gather weekly at 1 p.m., and at 1:30 p.m. we celebrate the sacrament. My colleague Guillermo Navarrete serves people in Mexico. I serve whoever's interested to partake in the United States. And we're blessing 2 loaves and 2 cups, but we celebrate it as one Eucharist. So there's my colleague Guillermo serving people in Mexico. On the Mexican side, where there are no restrictions of any kind, it's a much more robust community. There's an entire community of support, especially for people who have been deported to Tijuana. I'm glad to tell you more about their work. But really, there's a robust community of support on the Mexican side, and then a small number of us on the U.S. side in solidarity, really, with what their community they're building on the Mexican side of the fence. That's people saying goodbye down on the beach from a distance. Farewell. I don't know whether that's a brother and sister, uncle and niece, but a common farewell before leaving the space. So I'm going to turn it over to Jim Brown. Jim's an architect in San Diego who's been consulting pro bono with us for many years. Really did a lot of the heavy lifting in our negotiations with San Diego Border Patrol about public access, and is now helping us develop a vision for what it would be like if this were to become a truly binational park. So I'll have Jim share a little bit, and then we'll open it up for questions. Want me to click through for you, Jim?
I can click it.
Your choice.
Yeah, I'll click it.
Okay.
Where do I click it?
It's that one there.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Jim Brown. I'm an architect with public architecture and planning. And any way you cut it, this site is a stunning site. It has the potential to be a really beautiful experience for people that go. I mean, imagine, it's on the border between 2 countries as the border meets the ocean. I mean, the site has so many possibilities. Up till now, I've been acting as more of an advisor, fighting these really kind of close-in skirmishes with Border Patrol, trying to get microscopic improvements to the existing condition. When I first started working with the Friends of Friendship Park, almost 10 years ago now, it's been a long time, the Border Patrol just built the second fence. And at the moment they built it, it was like, how do we get this historic meeting place kick-started again? Like, we can't even get to the inner fence so families can meet. So they were making some progress. Border Patrol was like giving them an incredibly hard time with choices, especially in architectural choices, which they weren't sure, looking at plans, what might be better, what might be worse. So I volunteered to assist in that manner. And we haven't made very many advances, to tell you the truth. It seems like we're at a slight disadvantage, more than a slight. Homeland Security is a big organization, and we're not negotiating on equal footing. They don't always feel like they have to come clean with you for reasons that they can tell you no, and then you can say, well, why? Because you're trying to be, I'm trying to be a designer with a client. Say, they're my client, and the Friends of Friendship Park are my client. If your client is not level with you for the reasons that they're saying no, it's really hard to be an effective designer. So we've made microscopic changes, such as the big giant rolling wall on the northern fence that you saw. That was something they agreed to do just to make it feel a little bit more open. When I tell my colleagues, other architects, that I'm assisting the Friends of Friendship Park as a designer, they go, "That's the ugliest place I've ever seen." What the heck are you doing? I know, it's horrible. It's like my worst project ever. And the reason I'm doing it is just to make things a little bit better than it was before, and that's not a good place to be in. So, fast forward to what we're pushing for now. We've decided that the time of skirmishes, well, we'll still carry them on when we have to, but it's time to push a larger vision. And the larger vision is a true binational park on that site. A site that will be quite large on both sides, an equal amount of land, both in the United States and Mexico. Pedestrian-only crossing, you have to make it a crossing in order for this to work properly. Not cars, though. And with very respectful to the nature that's happening now. Oh, this is just a list of all of the organizations and laws that were suspended by Homeland Security when they took that land. They took the land from state parks. This is part of the stuff John has already seen. This is the design problem. A site, two walls 100 feet apart from each other. Now this is interesting. John mentioned the treaty, the Hilo Treaty, and the specific language upon solid basis relations of peace and friendship, which shall confer reciprocal benefits upon the citizens of both, and assure the concord, harmony, and mutual confidence wherein the two people should live as good neighbors. I've never really read treaty language quite like that, and I don't know that you can take this to lawyers and say, we're not fulfilling this treaty, obviously, but it's fascinating language. And we feel that the idea of creating a binational park is not a Democrat or Republican issue. People, I think, on both, either whether people that think there should be open borders or people that think there should be absolutely no one crossing borders. I think it's possible to still feel like there should be a symbol of friendship between the United States and Mexico. This idea of a binational park can work with either party and within a lot of belief systems. The best type of security that we can have as Americans is friendship with our neighbors. Mexico is so important to us. If you're not friends with your neighbors, you're not safe. You're just not safe. So a symbol like this would go a tremendous way to the average citizen of the U.S. and Mexico. This is an image of that one big gate opening to allow people to spill into a common space. So let me show you a little bit about the amount of land that we're proposing to create in the national park. Here's the line here. There's the border line. There's the marker that John was talking about, the border marker. This is the bullfighting arena. This is Mexico. This is the U.S. We're proposing that in Borderfield State Park is a vast estuary. We're proposing that we take all of this land where there's the parking, that's a parking lot seen from the air, and then all of this sort of improved estuary area. Ground has been graded with bulldozers, and there's kind of like a gathering spot there. It's multiple acres. Then we take the same size piece of land in Mexico, which would encompass the entire bullfighting arena, all sorts of businesses and homes. It's an interesting idea, and you think, well, if you take all that land, you have to tear down all those buildings, right? No. Why? You don't have to. Those kind of uses can coexist in a binational park. We've spoken to Border Patrol. Now then the next question is you ask, well, how do you enclose it? How do you make it a secure park? There would have to be a way to get in and out into each other's countries through some form of identification. I don't know, it's interesting because up until very recently when you went into Mexico, you didn't have to show your ID to anyone. You just went in. At Otay Mesa, just over the last year, they've started asking for passports. But still to this day, when you drive in, you show nothing. You just drive right through. So it's a little unsure what would happen on this edge of it. Would there be any checkpoints? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know, but it's critically important. And we've had discussions with Border Patrol because of the specific physical physical orientation of the north side of the border. There's a vast estuary there, and it kind of ends in a bay. People that go across, they can't necessarily dissolve into a city. So the Border Patrol has tons of passive techniques that they can put in play, as well as just people overseeing it. So it would be really nice if I would like to see in the design that there's not a wall that juts out into the ocean. That would be handled in a passive way through both combination of people and listening, cameras, listening posts, pressure points, whatever people come up with. I mean, so what we're going to do, we don't have a specific design yet, and there's a real danger in presenting a specific design without getting buy-in from people on both sides of the border. So we've applied for and were granted a LOE grant. That's the LOE Fellows is a graduate school of design at Harvard University group of people. Every year Harvard chooses 10 people from around the world to come to Harvard. They're designers, philosophers, all sorts of sort of creative folk from all over the world. And so we are given this grant, and they're going to send some of their experts on design, on border issues, to San Diego. We're going to have two forums. We're going to have a forum in Tijuana, and it won't just be LOE Fellows. It'll be like 8 LOE Fellows, and then there'll be politicians, artists, architects, anyone that's interested in saying, what would a binational park be? What would you like to see in a binational park? What are the elements? How do you do it? How does it look like? How do we also protect the existing condition, which is the existing people that come to Friendship Park, they don't necessarily have any idea whatsoever. And the Border Patrol actually, I think we're very lucky in this respect, has been allowing those kind of visits. We're not allowed to publicize it, like in the New York Times or something, but they do make that concession, and it's a really big deal. So anyway, we'll have the forum in Tijuana, and then we'll have another forum in San Diego. This is going to happen in spring of 2018. We'll take the information that we've learned, and people that have been involved in the forums will gather around tables, and we'll hammer out what the elements of this park are, the specific elements. It's a visionary plan, right? It seems kind of impossible sometimes when you think about it. It's like, oh yeah, right, it's just another plan. Who's going to care about this plan? How's it going to happen? It never stands a chance. But there are other examples of plans that didn't seem like they stood a chance. I mean, once you get a dream that people kind of resonate with, if it reaches the public imagination and holds it, anything can happen. When you think about, there's one moment in history that sort of took us all by surprise. That was when the Berlin Wall came down. Up until that moment when it came down, it just seemed like, oh yeah, that thing's going to be there forever. But suddenly, when you're reading the news reports and seeing it on the TV, it's like, oh my gosh, it just happened. It happened overnight. It didn't really happen overnight. It happened over like decades and years. And that's what we're doing now. We're laying that kind of groundwork to allow this to happen overnight. And I think we'll see it happen in our lifetime, certainly. This is an example of a binational park on our border with Canada, Peace Park, Peace Arch Park.
There's an inscription on there too. It says "Children of a Common Mother."
That's
Which is
really great. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's beautiful language.
What city is it in?
Vancouver.
South of Vancouver.
Yeah. So people there at that location, they drive in from either side, exit their cars, share time together in an open space, and then exit in their cars again. So our proposal is for a pedestrian access rather than vehicle access. But effectively, we're saying the U.S. federal government has already figured out how to do binational parks. We know how to do binational parks. There are a couple on the U.S.-Canada border.
There's another example on our own border, the U.S. and Mexico. Now this is not a park, but it's the cross-border express. You park in the U.S. and take the bridge over to the Tijuana International Airport. There's a phase 2 of this plan that they haven't done yet. But on that bridge, that pedestrian bridge, there are going to be meeting rooms built on either side of it. So they're in effect binational meeting space. It's happening right here. There's another precedent right here in our own city, right on the border. So some of the just basic elements that we, connection to the ocean, connection to parks. Some of just starting ideas about views and scope. But those designs are important. I mean, this is the important thing. The large gesture, capturing imagination, thinking in a larger way than we are now, and knowing that a vision can go a long way to if we can grasp the public's imagination, it may gain momentum and just all of a sudden like sweep into being.
So thank you very much. We're glad to take some questions and answers. Just to wrap up, as Jim was suggesting, we have long-standing conversations with San Diego Border Patrol, and we're now telling them, you guys already know how. You have all the technology and you know how to do this, and your colleagues are doing it on the northern border. So let's engage in conversation on these passive techniques of securing a perimeter. They know how to do that. The technology, that place is completely wired. They have ground sensors, they have motion detectors, they have infrared, they have cameras, and they have patrol agents stationed strategically to respond. It's probably, with the sole exception of when there's heavy coastal fog, this place is still crossable. But with the exception of heavy coastal fog, this is arguably the most difficult place to cross the border in the entire border region. It's simply so massively secured. And they have figured it out, as the statistics suggested. Nobody who knows what they're doing tries to cross illegally at this location. You've heard that story of how undocumented or unauthorized migration has been pushed out into the deserts because they've been so successful at preventing illegal crossing at locations like this. So they really know how to control the space. They're also much more invested in strategies of community policing. Border Patrol is way behind the curve on this, but really they're the largest law enforcement agency in the United States. They're about a decade behind, but they're beginning to embrace the same kinds of strategies that our local law enforcement agencies have been embracing across the country, and they're kind of figuring out, you know what, it's actually a little easier to control the space if we treat people like human beings and build relationships. They just figured that out, and but they're investing in community policing. They've created whole divisions that are about community relations and public relations, and in fact, they staff the park now with agents that have been specially trained for this kind of work. So when I go down on Sundays, and the agents themselves, I've talked to them off the record, and it's a great assignment because it's quiet and calm and beautiful and cushy, and there's just no trouble. It's a very calm and secure space. So we're just encouraging them to think a little bit more creatively about what it would be like to open it up and create a truly binational space. So thank you very much for coming and taking an interest. I'm glad to answer questions. Jim is as well, I know. It looks like we have about 10 minutes or a little bit more. Thank you very much. Questions? Yes?
Are there any American politicians who are helping with this?
No, so we've not really reached out to politicians on this just yet. We want to figure out how to incorporate them into the strategy that Jim's talking about. So our vision is a major public forum in San Diego, and same time frame as a major public forum in Tijuana next spring. So when we were protesting the elimination of public access, we had virtually every elected official in San Diego County signing on to our letters of opposition. Because when they originally built that second wall, Border Patrol told us they were going to close Friendship Park. That was their original proposal. No more public access on the U.S. side. So politicians in our local area were confident once we have a little bit more developed proposal and can speak a little bit more concretely about the parameters, we'll then begin queuing them up, and we're very optimistic. Our local politicians, I think our statewide politicians will join in. The big problem with the borderlands is that decisions are made in Washington by people who don't know the first thing about the border, to be frank. I mean, they couldn't be more ignorant about the border than people who are making, legislative and policy decisions about the border. So that's the fundamental challenge we face, is the decision-making power, because these are federal decisions, are made far, far away by people who are profoundly ignorant of the actual context in which they're working. Yeah.
The pictures show an estuary just north of this park.
Yes.
What is it? Which one is
The
it?
Tijuana estuary.
Will the cleaning up of the sewage problem have any effect on use?
Yeah, so that whole issue of the Tijuana infrastructure and the sewage spills, which are persistent, there was just another one this week, into the Tijuana estuary. That's a structural problem. This estuary is the Tijuana watershed is spans a third of San Diego County and double the size amount on the Mexican side of the border. So any rainfall from that entire region basically comes funneling down and right through this estuary.
Yeah.
So the problem of runoff from Tijuana, and it flows from south to north, the estuary, right? So you have a city of 3 million people, poorly infrastructured, and the entire runoff of that city comes into this estuary. So unfortunately, that problem is not a problem that can be solved on site. That's a problem that pertains to municipal development in Tijuana.
But if they decided to line it with concrete or something, they would, your access to your park would be affected.
Yes, it would. Yeah, although the actual river, Tijuana River, runs far inland, about 1.5 miles inland, and then cuts out to the coast. So you
I'm
have
most familiar with the estuaries
Yeah.
in North County, but
yeah,
you get inland and you don't know
yeah.
what route the river took.
It's a vast area. I heard the mayor of Tijuana in 2008 bragging that they were building a new community out on the eastern edge of the Tijuana metropolis, and he said it's the first time in the history of Tijuana that we're planning a community before people move into it. The entire history of Tijuana is people moving in and then the city trying to build in infrastructure, in and around them. So it's a huge urban planning problem, unfortunately. Yes.
When you show the people coming to the Mexican side of the border for communion,
Yes.
is that the Catholic Diocese of Tijuana or?
No, my colleague is Pastor Guillermo Navarrete, is a pastor of the Methodist Church, La Iglesia Metodista de Mexico. So the Methodist Church of Mexico is not a part of our United Methodist Church. It's its own independent denomination. But we don't wear our Methodist swag down there. Nobody quite knows. I typically am addressed as Padre because people, and they call it La Misa very commonly, the Mass. So we don't brand ourselves denominationally, but we're both affiliated with the Methodist tradition. And we include people routinely, guests and visitors on both sides from across the entire ecclesial spectrum. So, yeah.
Speaking of the spectrum, is Dermot Rogers part of your group, or does he do a separate Catholic Mass?
No, Dermot has been a collaborator of ours for many years. Is my most common pinch hitter when I'm unable to be there. He's actually in Ireland now. He lost his sister, but I'm not there this Sunday. I have a colleague who's filling in for me. But Dermot Rogers, an independent Catholic priest, for many years has been one of our closest collaborators and my most reliable substitute when I'm not able to be there on Sundays. And when he's there, he is a Catholic priest, and he gets a different kind of action from people. I think he's gotten many First Communion requests while there. He's done a couple of weddings there. We've done a couple of marriages across the fence. I'm trying to work on one now where the issue is marriage license. The woman was deported, but her husband, who's legally here in the U.S., wants to marry her, and so I'm negotiating with Border Patrol that she would be able to stick a pen through the fence to at least sign the marriage certificate. And that would enhance his ability to try to apply for her re-entry to the United States. So there's a whole kind of sacramental life that goes on down there that is way beyond my Methodist credentials. Yeah.
Is that first video you showed, I saw it was on Vimeo.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is my favorite video of many that have been produced. It's not for distribution. That was done by an academic company, a textbook company, that has licensed it for distribution to colleges and universities. So they gave me a code that I could use for public presentations, but I'm not supposed to distribute it or make it available. They're on our website, friendshippark.org, though. You'll find a lot of other good videos. It's been, because of obviously the symbol of the place and the symbol of the border wall, it became an international destination. We've had media from all over the world, and there's some really wonderful media clips that you'll find on our website.
You said friendshippark.org.
Friendshippark.org. At that site, you'll simultaneously find a link to our petition, change.org petition. We're pushing 1,000 signatures. Again, we're petitioning President Trump and President Peña Nieto of Mexico just to say, hey, this is the level at which this would have to happen. We don't have any illusions that President Trump is going to act on this, but as Jim suggested, we're just trying to build a kind of a context and a groundswell of public support for the idea, hoping that somewhere down the pike, who knows, somewhere down the pike, somebody might come along and say, why don't we just do that?
I was going to say, this is really refreshing and interesting to hear. I don't know a lot about Friendship Park. I've not been in San Diego County long, but for sure I'm going to try to get people that I know to Google friendshippark.org,
Please, thank you.
because in this day and age, all we hear on the media is walls. How
Yeah.
wonderful to hear this, and if they view that, if they see that first video that you showed, I mean, we were sitting here, it brings tears to your eyes, it puts the humanness, it
Yeah.
brings the,
Thank you for that. Yeah. What we're saying is, if the U.S. federal government is going to spend, as they're desiring to do, hundreds of millions of dollars on the U.S.-Mexico border, why not do something productive?
so simple.
Why not do something that is positive?
Build relationships.
Why not build relationships? And why not apply existing tactics and strategies and technologies that are already proven and that are already being used at other locations, apply them to this historic site? And why not let this historic site fulfill its original purpose? It was designed as a place of binational meeting and friendship. That was its charter. And we're trying to say, why not let the place live up to its origins?
It's interesting, that when we're looking at things futuristic, trying to build a high wall when we can take a drone, and now we deal with technology, to carry people and just cross that border. But
Yeah. What's your take on the walls, Jim? We've had these prototype walls east of San Diego. Any comment? Professional?
My personal view is it was done to fulfill a campaign promise, and they're really not going to build. They might build a few miles. I can't imagine going to build. There's no need. There's already walls in most of the cities. I can't. It makes no sense to put walls up in the desert.
Border Patrol themselves are not championing a lot more walls. When you talk to them offline, they're not. They say that the critical urban areas where they wanted more infrastructure have been pretty well built out, and that the remaining stretches of the border they have well supervised with technology. There are a few stretches. The big threat right now is the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, a beautiful stretch of the border where there's a national park, Big Bend, and they're threatening to build 14 miles straight through the middle of that beautiful national park. So there are certain locales that are still under, if Trump were to get an allocation from Congress, he could still do some real damage with the Department of Homeland Security constructing new wall. But by and large, 660 of the 2,000 miles already have some kind of infrastructure on them. And when you talk to Border Patrol agents, they say more infrastructure is not our cutting edge, not their pressing need.
can I offer another alternative solution to the signing through the wall?
Yes, please.
Just getting iPads and trying to do it that way, connecting that.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Thank you.
Not
The woman who's helping me on that one is I'm not sure what, it seems she's a non-denominational pastor. She's done this before. The problem was first getting a license from the county register office, because technically both parties are supposed to be at the county office to take out a license. So she solved that problem and somehow gotten her hand on a paper license, but it's kind of what the county registrar will accept as far as documentation. Yeah, thank you for that. Last thought, one more question, just to close up and follow up on Jim's notion. I know you all need to move on to your next workshop. We had a member of our coalition, some of you may know him, Jamie Gates from Wilhelm Nazarene University. Jamie is a native South African, and his story, which I love, akin to what Jim was saying about the Berlin Wall. Jamie left South Africa 5 years before the fall of apartheid, and he says that when he left South Africa, if you walk around South Africa and you talk to people, they would say, "Listen, apartheid is just part of the culture. It's how the world is organized. There's no way it's ever going to end. It's baked into the culture and the institutions. That's just what South Africa is." He came to the United States, and then when he went back to South Africa 5 years after the fall of apartheid, he went around South Africa. He said, "I couldn't find anybody who ever said that they were ever in favor of apartheid in the first place." So in 10 years, it went from "this is just the way the world is organized" to everybody saying, "Well, I was never really in favor of it to begin with." And I do think that that's this public imagination and this kind of somehow, I do think that whether it's in our life or not, sometime people will be looking back on all of this craziness and will go, well, I can't believe they were actually, organized the border that way. So that's my hope. Yeah, question?
I just have a comment. I grew up down in that area.
Yeah.
One of the guys that used to go across the border.
Oh, good.
Both guys down the other side.
Yeah.
Hearing you guys speak in your website, I'm going to try to share with people.
Thank you.
On the neighborhood.
Please,
They're
yes.
very concerned about this.
Yes.
That's history there.
You bet.
And turn that allows this.
Thank you for that. Yes, because we're driving in from out of the area, sometimes we're not as connected to the local communities that we wish we were. So thank you. Thank you very much.